So a few things on starting to set keys. You can key things a few different ways. So if you're keeping it simple and you're working with an SVG, you can key things through the SVG Attribute Editor right in here. If I want things to be keyed differently, like we see we have this one. So I have two options. I'm going to show you a couple of things, right? Let's start with this one over here where I dropped out everything and it has text, right? So we saw how to paste it in. Under the Geometry tab, I cranked up the curve resolution to 10 so that it smoothed this out a bit. And under SVG, I have these different pieces here. Now, you notice they say path. So if I have a whole bunch of pieces, if I select it, it highlights what it is, but that's sort of a bit of a pain in the butt to know which one is which. So just for your own knowledge is when I'm actually doing that, and I actually have the text or any different shapes, if I go to layers, you see there's a little blue dot. It may be hard in the projector, but it's in there. And when I select different things, like, oh, I want to select this. Let me choose the white and select in the middle. This M. I find where that little blue dot is, and that's telling me which one is selected. So if I double click on that and just type in, oh, M, then when I would actually paste that in, it's going to show up instead of path, it's going to show up as M. So just like if I took this up here, and I've selected it, there it is there, and I double clicked and called it top. Click on this one, there it is there. You know, depending on what it is and how it's grouped. So I could name things in here, just so that you know, so you don't have to deal with all the paths in here. But regardless of that, let me show you a quick way of starting to modify this guy. Okay. So right now it came in, I'm going to go under the Animation tab right here. And for motion graphics wise, this one is pretty cool because it allows me to just quickly animate stuff coming in. Okay, so let me show you. I'm going to turn on animate. So I'm under the SVG window, and I turn on animate. And we see we have the translates, the rotates, the scale, and the set keys. I'm going to check the little guy that says auto update on set keys so it actually will show the difference. And at the bottom, I have my timeline. Okay, so the timeline, these numbers on the timeline are frames. They're not seconds or anything. They're actual frames. And if I go to the bottom right, all the way to the right, you'll see in the corner, this little guy, orange guy, looks like he's being chased by an evil deer. And when I click on that, it should bring up my, oh, I know what it is. It should bring up my preferences, which it didn't because last time I was using this, I was on a dual screen, so my preferences are off to the side. So give me 1 second while I pull those back in. Project, extend. Yep, there it is. Get over here. And now I'll set it back. Duplicate. Okay. So this is my little animation box, and what you'll see is my playback speed and my frame rate is 24 frames a second, which is what I want. And that's when I clicked on this little guy here to pull up those preferences. So that means for every 24 frames, 1 second will pass. 1 1,000. 2 seconds, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, and so on. So that's how I start to get the idea of how I want to set my keys. But in the general motion of it, so watch this. I'm going to show you a cool way of doing this. Let's say my camera is locked right here, and I want this thing to come flying from behind me and go in front of me. So the basic way, whenever you're setting your frames, and this is the pattern, if you don't do it this way, things get jumbled. But it's a very easy process. Step 1, I go to the frame when I want something to happen. Step 2, I manipulate or modify whatever I want that's selected, and I make it happen. In step 3, I set a key. So go to the frame, manipulate, set a key. Go to the next frame that you want something different to happen, manipulate, set a key. So I'm going to go, and I'm actually going to say, I'm going to go in reverse, not of that process, but when I want something to happen, and I'm going to show you what I mean. Let's say at frame 48, I'm going to go over here, and if I say set keys, it will set a key for all the translates, rotates, or scales. So I'm just going to set key. And then I'm going to go back to frame 1, and I'm looking at this, and the z-axis is depth, okay? So whenever we see these 3 numbers over here, it's x, y, z. So z is the last one. And I want this to be a negative 500, enter, set key. And what that basically means is that now, oops, you know what, boom, oh that's cool, should have been positive. Look at that. So I did it reverse, it should have been positive. But check it out when I hit play. Right there. It has a built-in offset. So if I go, yeah, I have to change that, huh?
How do you decide to make it work for the
That's the built-in offset. Okay. So there's a delay of 50 frames that's right here. If I turn that to 0, and then I hit play, the whole thing goes bam, like that. If I offset them, let's go back to 50. And let's make it even more fun and say randomized delay. So now, not only is it not one at a time, it's doing this. Watch this. They're all coming at different points. So that's randomized. If I say, you know what, I wanted it to come from behind me. So instead of a negative 500, I go back to frame 1, change the negative 500 to a positive 500, set a key. And now watch what happens when I hit play. See? If I decide, wow, you know, it's taking too long, I want it even faster, I have it set at 1 and at 48. I'm going to shift, left mouse click, to select that keyframe. That's the red line in my timeline, and then I can just left mouse drag and move it. So now this animation is going to be much faster. Okay. So all I did was animate this stuff on the z-axis. Basically, it's moving from back to front. That's it. And then just hitting play. So really simple. Now, if I wanted it to rotate while it's coming in, I have to decide what axis do I want it to rotate on. So rotating on the just to give you an idea. I'm just going to create a basic shape. Create polygon cube. I'm just going to show you this. So I'm going to give it, I'll flatten it out so it makes sense so you can see the detail of it. So if I rotate this, press E and rotate it on the Y, it's rotating it from a center pivot like it's on a pole, right? That's the Y-axis. So if I want these guys to spin that way going in, I'd have to change the properties of the Y-axis. If I wanted them to spin like this, that's on the X-axis. I can see it in the channel box. The X rotate is changing when I spin it like this. Which means that if I wanted it to go on the Z-axis, it would go in like this. So it depends on what look I'd want. Why that's relevant is when I go here and I say, you know what, I want these to also spin in, right? So I have to decide which way do I want to spin. Do I want to spin like this, or do I want to spin like this? And I think along the Y might be kind of cool, at least for the font or the text. So I go back into the SVG, and where the rotate Y is, I'm going to actually go back to frame 1, so where it starts. And let's just give it a, so X, Y, Z. So on the rotate Y, I'm going to change this to, let's say, 360 would be one turn, right? So let's say we're going to make it really spin. Let's say we're going to do it like, because these are degrees that I'd type in. So I'm going to make it 2400 on frame 1 and set a key. So that now, yeah, so everything would actually be spinning out. But I'd have to see them. So look at this. Do you see when they come in, as they come in? Oh, come on. Let's see. Oh, it didn't set. 2400, enter, set a key. There we go. There we go. You see that? So they're spinning in that way. See that? If I go, wow, that's a little too much, let's drop that down to like 1200. Oops, wrong one. 1200, enter, set a key. There we go. So now, if my camera is set up like this, and I want to see them coming in, do you see they're spinning in? It's going so fast, it's hard to, but it basically is. If I slow it down by adding more frames, you'll see them spin more. Cool. So that's simple, just to kind of put that in, just to spell it out. If I wanted this to be different, in other words, I want this maybe not to spin, but these guys to fly in, and this is a hole, then I would bring them in separately. So then I'd have different attributes for each of these, one for the logo, one for the text. So I'd bring the logo in one SVG, I'd bring the text in another one, and then that way it's a lot easier to separate them that way of what I want to do. So if they aren't doing the same thing, then bring them in separately and then just you know, reposition them back together.
Is there no way to do it, like, bring it together with mine, so this is one item?
The way it's doing it right now, you would just, yeah, you would think of these as clusters. So if I want a different cluster to do something different, then I bring that into one cluster.
Because it's from one software to another, it's just fine.
Partially, yeah, because it's bringing it in that way, but you would just bring it in, like, for this one. If I said, oh, I want text for this one, right? So I bring in another SVG. I go back into Illustrator. I would select my text, which has been converted as outline. And then I'd paste it in. Yeah, and then do all the stuff. The only difference is that because it's no longer relative in scale, I would just go in and I would scale it in here to what I want.
Oh, I don't know.
See how easy that is? Kid stuff. Bink. There you go. And now I can do these separately. So I could actually have this one, check it out. So now with this one, I could actually have this guy, if I tell it to animate, and I want this one to rotate on the Y. Let's say I set a key where I want to stop at like frame, let's do that again, let's do like frame 48, set a key, and then at frame 1, this one is going to be like, let's say 1600, set a key, see that? Now, remember, the way it's doing it right now is because it has a built-in delay that's set. So if I turn off that delay, and now we play it, see? And then it goes there. And I could even, this is cool, go into the viewport and tell it, check it out, turn on motion blur in the hardware render. So when I turn that on, and now I hit play, oops, just rewind, you would start to get a little bit of motion blur as it goes. And then as that actually happens, now I could set up these guys to actually animate differently because I brought them in as a separate SVG. So now I could tell them, oh, I want you guys to animate, but now I want you to do that same thing. And I'll start you like later on at positive 250, set a key, and then by right about here, you're at 0, set a key. So now let's see what happens. See? So I'm able to have more control and offset them simply because I brought them in separately. So that's the basis of when you first start animate, the simple animation. There is more advanced where you can actually use MASH, which we'll be getting into probably next class. MASH is Maya's motion graphics plugin. We're already using it with SVG and stuff. We're just not scratching the surface of its power. That one that you saw with the student who did the world that was like flying around, looked all digital, kind of futuristic, that was done with MASH. That was, where was she? No, not that one. Wait for it. This one. This was done in MASH. Okay, so that was done in MASH. That's where you're getting into like, oh yeah, we put in the high octane, and we're going to start using these components that you can put onto it. There is an awesome, I have the link, it's on our in our resources page. I have links to tutorials besides the ones that I have laid out for you guys in my playlist. But Maya has a far better, we'll touch on it, but Maya has a very in-depth list, like, tutorials. They are a bit of a long sit-down if you want to get into them, or like really start to get deep into them, but they go over a lot of the components of MASH and the things that you can do. And the link is in our resources. Where did I put those? So many things. Motion graphics resources doc. So, including examples and stuff, example pages, MASH workflow and scenes. So these tutorials here are the ones that you'd want to go through if you want to dip in, and there's some really awesome stuff. So now you know where to be able to reach them, but you could see just with using the basics how I could get this. And then next time we'll go over just like, oh, I want to animate a camera. How do I set that up? If I want, after it does that, it does one of these. And then you could even do a create directional light. Something like this if I want to press 7 to turn lights on. And we could turn on shadows. So now look at that, it's casting, see? The last thing, you'll notice that if you try to, like, oh, I want maybe the center part to be red, right? And you notice it's not working. Let me show you how to fix this. It's using, right now it's colored by what's called vector colors. In other words, if we took a vector image and each of those points is acting as a gradient that's flushing out color from it. And it's overriding any materials I would put on it right now. So to fix that and say, no, I want to take control over it and make my own materials and do cool stuff with it, I have to kind of release it from that and then assign my own materials. So in other words, watch this. I'm going to right click, and I'm recording all this so you guys will have it, and I'll send the link out. Right click, go to face mode, and I'm just going to select the face, polygonal face of this circle. But let's say I want the whole thing. So rather than me going shift, select, 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 which will take forever, I'm just going to hold down shift and keep hitting period to grow the selection until I have the whole piece. So now you'll notice I've got all the bevels, I've got the whole front and back without me going click, click, click and selecting everything. That was shift select. Now I'm going to right click, assign a new material, and let's say I want it to be a blend, and I'm going to make the blend red. And you'll notice, hey wait, I made it red and I see no red. And that's because it's still being locked to those vertex colors. It's there, it's just ignoring it. This is how we fix that. Under mesh display, we are going to go to, where are you? There's the vertex colors, paint tool. Here it is. Vertex color sets, and I want to delete the current set. Bam. And now it's actually calculating it properly, which now means, oops, I want those back to black, so I'm just going to go grab the faces of both of these, shift period, just keep going till I grab the whole thing, grab the whole selection, and now I can see I have all of it. Right click, hold, assign new material, blend, and say, oh, I want this to be black. And I could decide, like, how do I want the shininess of it to be. See? Where I could tweak that out. There we go. Let's check that out. Let's make sure. Cool. There we are. Okay. Does that make sense? So we can actually go in, we could do some tweaks. We could even choose a different, like a spotlight. So I'd scale that up, pull that back. Okay. Look at that, see? And you could rotate any of these so they would actually go across. If I wanted to do that 21st century thing, where you have it like this and you kind of animate them, you know, going back and forth. And then you can actually go in and tweak out any of the properties of a lot of these, like how big is the cone, how soft are the edges to it to make it, you see that? I softened out the edges so it's less cartoony. The drop off, making it more intense in the center and fade out as you go away from that. I could change the intensity, the color, if I wanted it to be like, you know, blue or hot like that. That's kind of neat. And since I'm using a hardware render, however I see it in here is how it's going to look. So we're going to be doing a hardware render, and I'll show you the last thing. I'm going to add an ambient light, which you normally don't use, but for a hardware render I will, because I can turn this down and then give it like a little bluish tint so things don't go to a pure black. See? Kind of cool off the back, warm the front kind of deal. Something like that. So you could have it like this. And if I just animate the whole thing, duplicate this, Control D, so we can have you on to the text. This guy, if I wanted to animate it, I just go in, where do I want it to animate? Like here. I'm going to increase how many frames this is going to be. So I have it, I press S, and then where do I want it to be? Move it, press S. See? Then maybe move it back. So if I want to see the whole thing, and I hide my lights or don't show them, so I could actually see it, hide the grid. And I want to test this out so I could see what it looks like. I'd also do the same for the text so it pops out. But let me show you how I right-click in my timeline and go to the options for Playblast, this little option here. And this is where we crank out a movie. Let's make it a decent 1280 by 720. scale 100%, quality 100%. And you'd either do QuickTime. QuickTime is a little better than AVI because Windows can read QuickTime. Apples get funky when you talk about AVIs. So, and I'll just uncheck these guys. And let's just do a Playblast and see what happens. So I'm just going to hit Playblast. I set up the camera the way I want. And it's going to run through it. I'm just doing a rough, so it's not like, oh my god, this is it, you know. But just so you can actually see. And then once it's all done, it will save that movie. Copy. Open. Let's see what you look like. Oh, that's right. QuickTime on PC is always weird too. What I'm going to do is I will just go to that file, okay, and open it in VLC, which is actually better for everything. Look, so there's my movie. See? Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So that's basically just setting that up so that you can at least test it out and see what the movie looks like. We'll get more into the render settings and stuff, but look at some of the videos. I will post this one up and send you guys the link so you can walk through that. While I'm still recording, are there any questions? All good? So creating a new camera, you can just go panels, perspective, and you create a new camera. And then now I have another camera, so I can always have one that I'm going to key and set keys for, excuse me, and one that I can work with. Usually the regular perspective camera I leave alone, and if I'm going to animate a perspective camera, I create a new one. Yeah. Creating the lights is just simply going in to create lights, and then you choose which light you want, and I have the definitions of the different lights in brief. Ambient light is light that's everywhere. You usually always want to tone it down because it washes out, gets rid of shadows and everything. A directional light is like light from a far off place, like the sun or the moon, that can cast shadows, but it's everywhere going in one direction. Point light is more like if you actually had a light that is, it's an omni-light, a light emitting from out in every direction from it. So if I create a point light, right, and we see it, scaling it up doesn't do anything, but it's actually, you know, a light that's everywhere. This one's like really good if we're just trying to do something like this, right? So I could animate this kind of going across, which would be nice. Cool. And you can see that's an actually cool effect. Mm-hmm. And what else we got? The spotlight, which I showed you, which is, you know, like a cone light, and it has a lot of nice little properties you can edit. Oops, let me show the lights. That do that again. So yeah, here's what the point light looks like. The aerial light would be a bit much for this. It's good for like interiors and stuff, but what it does is this guy is emitting light out of this square going where the line is, and it tends to be a much hotter light, and it actually, at least in the hardware, the size of it changes its intensity and its affected area. More, I would use that more for like interiors and stuff like that. or showing off characters and things. And the volume light is like a point light, but it has an area around it that's physical that you can see of the area of influence of it, where the light decays. But yeah, you would just key these guys exact same way. You go to a frame, I want you here, press S. Go to another frame, I want you here, move it, press S. Cool?
Yeah, it's too bad I don't have like a little visual for it. I can actually do that to the animation.
Oh, you mean like, well, there are, depending on the animation. There are animation curves you can pull in. And there's also the graph editor, which we'll get into. We might get, this is the motion of animation here. This is where you can do the ease in, the ease out, because this is the motion shown through an actual curve. The flatter it is, there's no motion. The more vertical it is, the faster the motion. So that's where you can see it's slow, it speeds up, slows down, speeds up, slows down. Think of it like a roller coaster kind of deal. But yay! So we went over getting this stuff in. In this video, how to replace the default Vertex colors with a material when you want to actually do that stuff. So if you want to change the colors afterwards, it's in this video. You guys will be able to see that. And then just some of the basic stuff of setting a key. Just like literally, very last thing is if I take this guy and I decide, oh, I want him here. Go to frame. Frame 1, you're here. Set a key. Frame 15, you're here. Set a key. Frame 24, or let's just say here. Boom. Set a key. So you see I go, just like I had said. So look at this. Boing, boing. Just by setting keys. So we'll talk more about that later. But for right now, that should give you guys enough to work on. Make sure to, this week, I see the storyboards. Make sure to post up an image, a render of your, if you haven't already, an image of your logo, or logos for some of you, of the concepts on VoiceThread. So like I would just take this guy, render out a hardware image. Oops, not an Arnold. Stop that. Hardware 2.0. File. Save image. Make sure to say color managed image. And you'd save it as a JPEG. And then you could do a few images if you want in a single post. And then, you know, maybe different angles or whatever, but make sure to post those up this week so we can see what they look like in 3D. Okay. I'll be here for the next 40 minutes or so, 30, 40 minutes. So if anybody needs help or to go over stuff, I'm here.